Well, I'm joined again by my panel, PR consultant and former Labour aide Stella Tsantekidou and Chief Political Correspondent of The Times, Aubrey Allegretti. Stella, there we saw Nick Thomas-Symonds responding to Chris Philp. In your view, who had the better of that particular exchange?
Oh, of course, the Labour Party has a much better position on this because the truth of the matter is that the Labour Party has not been in government for the 15 years, so they have not presided over rapists and criminals and murderers being released early, and they also haven't presided over the complete and total failure of this government to build more prisons, which is one of the most important things that the Labour Party needs to do, not just build more prisons, but planning reform more generally. I know it's boring, but clearly sips on every single issue. How can you be making promises about locking up criminals when you don't have anywhere to put them?
Aubrey, I thought it was a difficult position for Chris Philp there. I mean, he was talking about the rate of conviction, but of course it is the case that the government is having to let people out of prison because the prison estate isn't big enough.
Absolutely right, and sort of law and order, crime and justice, areas where the Conservative Party was traditionally much more trusted, it has lost that trust from voters, and it's much harder to regain it than it is to lose it. So I suspect the Labour representative there, Nick Thomas-Symonds, will be very happy that they're talking about the Conservatives' record. Chris Philp determined to try and turn the tables and talk about what life was like under Labour pre-2010. But I think most people just think that there is enough distance now between 2010 that it's sort of nonsense for the Conservatives to keep pointing back to that point and argue that things were worse then. I think people just think it is worth letting the other side having a go.
Earlier in the hour, Polly broke the news that at least 750 small boat migrants arrived in the UK waters today. That takes the total number of migrants who've crossed this year to almost 12,200. Stella, more bad news for the government, so you might rejoice in that. But all parties, when they were asked the other day in the debate, all major parties in England and Wales, I think, no, I have to refine that again, Labour, Conservative and Liberal Democrat all agree that migration should be reduced. How are you going to convince people that you're going to reduce migration? I mean, how is the Labour Party going to do that?
Yeah, so polls have already shown that people trust the Labour Party more with reducing migration than the Conservatives, obviously, because...
But are they right to?
But are they right to? That's a very good question. I think they are right to. I think there are a lot of levers that the government has not yet used, which the Labour Party will be doing. I think there is a difference between legal immigration and illegal immigration. Personally, I hope that there is going to be a sensible plan and not something like what the Reform Party suggests, where they want to go for net zero immigration, because I don't think we are net zero migration, because I don't think the country is there. There's going to be economic hardship if that happens. And I think that, voters may want to have lower immigration, but they also want to have an economy that grows and they want to have prices that are stable. And sometimes you can't have both things at the same time.
Yes, immigration seems to be a pretty big issue. I'm not sure how far Labour has got with convincing people that it will do better, but anyway, people appear to be pretty fed up with the Conservatives about their failure to deliver on their promises. Now, just changing the subject a bit, this morning, Sir Keir Starmer faced questioning from the British public on LBC, including a challenge from a head teacher of a special education needs school. She pointed out that 30% of her students don't have an educational healthcare plan which would exempt them from Labour's proposed VAT charge on the school fees. And so they would be forced into the state sector where their needs cannot presently be met. Sir Keir seemed to stumble in his response.
Just give some numbers before I get Michelle back in. The number of pupils receiving EHC at SEND schools, 7,600 pupils at private schools get SEND support with EHC. 103,000 do not, Sir Keir. That's 7,600 will be catered for, 103,000 will not. What does Labour plan to do about that?
Well, Nick, we've, where there is a plan in place, we will put the exemption in place. Where there isn't a plan, then that exemption doesn't apply. Not a thoroughly convincing answer, and rather it had the feel of a policy for the few, not the many. If Nick Ferrari has his figures there right, I'm slightly surprised about this pickle that Starmer is in. I'd heard him otherwise saying to the public, "We know that some of you are going to lose out on this policy, putting VAT on private school fees, but we thought it through. We're doing something with the money." and I feel comfortable with my position. He didn't look very comfortable with his position there.
I think it was quite a difficult performance for him, particularly because before that clip, there was the head teacher, or I think the deputy head, who had asked the question in a really sort of open-ended way, saying, how are you going to support these potentially 90,000 pupils who have SEN needs, but we can't sort of do anything for them through this plan. They're going to be impacted by the VAT rise. And when he gave that answer, she then came back with this quite withering assessment of saying, actually, I don't think you've thought this through properly enough. I suspect it's probably one of those things where if Labour gets into government, as it's sort of predicted to do, that the civil service will then go through with a fine-tooth comb and say, well, you're going to have issues here, and the departments will sort of compete over the policy and say, you haven't thought about this. So it's probably a party policy which, again, when it meets reality and Labour gets into Whitehall, the civil servants will probably try to unpick.
Stella, it strikes me as quite a pickle because, I mean, either 100,000 people are going to have VAT applied to their fees, and remember, we're talking about special educational needs schools, or the Labour Party is going to have to revise the policy when it gets into government, which means that a great chunk of the money that it claims is going to be raised is not going to be raised.
Why in this country is it so hard to get the upper middle class and people who have disposable income to pay for everything, for anything at all whatsoever? And whenever the lower middle class has to pay for anything or the working class has to pay for everything, you never hear of it. You know why? Because they are not in the media, but I am here. I went to a private school, by the way, and I'm very passionate about the fact that private school, the VAT exemption needs to be lifted. Now, about the specific scenario with Keir Starmer, what he should have said is that if they don't have a plan, they should apply for one. Because if their kids have special education, so for example, if they have autism or something like that, they should apply for a plan.
My goodness, you are a toughie. So you think the leader of the Labour Party today should have said...
Don't tell him that. Please keep me in the Labour Party.
You think he should have said to the head teacher, well, John will get the parents to apply for a plan.
Broadcasting is a very difficult thing to do. I would definitely not suggest that I'm a better media performer than Keir Starmer. But you're asking me what he should have said, and I'm telling you right now, like, he's probably more tired than I am, and he has a busier schedule. So I'm going to tell you.
I wish he had said that, because I think we'd have big headlines tonight.
It's a very small number of kids that we're talking about.
103,000.
And even smaller numbers still that will not be able to get a plan. And why would they not be able to get a plan if they're in special education? I'm not quite sure, because I'm well aware of the limitations of the education system and how overburdened state schools are.
But I think not quite sure is the summary, isn't it? Starmer is not quite sure. He's come up with a policy about which he's not quite sure.
No, I think he is quite sure. It's a policy that the Labour Party has been trailing for some time. I think what happened there is that his empathy skills kicked in, and he didn't want to be rude to the head teacher, and he didn't want to say something, against parents, because of course I completely understand. It's a very difficult thing to tell to parents. Look, I know you want to do the best for your kids. People get very emotional when it comes to their kids' education, and I totally get that.
Despite your emotionality, unfortunately, we have to bring the discussion to an end. I thank you once again very much indeed, Stella and Aubrey.